peel back the onion and there's more questions
Yeah.
that come out than answers.
Right. The only thing we know is those 9 months.
When Dred Scott was here, he was Dr. Emerson's slave. And so
Alicia Vellante is a scholar and historian with an interest in equity and social justice. Kate read an article of Alicia's and reached out to share her story of William Dixon.
So what was your thoughts?
Somehow William Dixon is here at the fort offering to volunteer for someone.
Somewhere on these historic grounds, Herman and William connected and struck a deal with a down payment. Schaefer's kept his word and sent Dixon the rest of the money, but the young soldier never got a chance to use it and start a new life. He was deployed downriver to Louisiana where, like so many soldiers in the Civil War, he died of disease.
Most of the time he was in the service, he suffered, and so that breaks my heart.
And that's the story of most people who fought in the Civil War. Most of the deaths were the way that William Dixon passed away. Great-grandfather felt that it was important enough to keep telling that story.
Yes. I think when you look at the life he built, he worked hard his whole life.
Yeah.
He kept that farm together to give to his children. So the family through the generations has kept that farm dear to us.
Everything that farm seems to represent is all about life.
Yes.
Yes.
It's all about sustainability. It's all about love, you know, and it's all about family. And I think, like, what a beautiful legacy.
I think, especially for our kids, there is a new appreciation for what William Dixon meant to our family and just kind of understanding where they came from.
While the farm is a living legacy of this immigrant and this African American, Dixon is also recognized at the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C. While in D.C., Kate visited the site and shared the story of her family's connection to Dixon with a museum staffer who was so moved that he suggested she come back to the museum to do a descendants lecture.
I'm not a descendant, but yet my family benefited from this man's decision to go in Herman's place. And so to be even invited to do a descendant speech, it felt like incredible irony, but also an honor.
So that gets to your question, do we feel like he's a part of our family? Yeah.
From Europeans to Southeast Asians and Africans, many have come to Minnesota because of the disruption and dislocation caused by war. African Americans share a part of this refugee experience.
There is an African American refugee history that's associated with many different events. If you rewind back, that was true for those folks who were part of Minnesota's history in the 1850s and 1860s.
From the plantation, and as the clash waiting, you can see the flags waving. But blacks on the move during the Civil War weren't called refugees. Instead, a curious word was added to America's racial lexicon.
Contraband basically means the slave who left the plantation. General Benjamin Butler coined the term contraband.
General Ben Butler said, "These people are contraband of war. They are no different in a sense than the mules, than the horses, than anything else that we capture from the enemy. They are contraband of war being used for war purposes."
Contraband tended to dehumanize blacks, but that was the language of the middle years of the Civil War because there were a number of slave-owning states that had not seceded. And so the federal government was constantly walking a tightrope in fighting this war without alienating a lot of potential Southern allies who wanted to keep their slaves.
In fact, this tightrope walking meant Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all of those in bondage.
The Emancipation Proclamation only included those states that were still in open rebellion against the Union.
The 13th Amendment would free all enslaved blacks, but those in border states like Missouri weren't waiting and set out to find their freedom. Some of these contraband were brought to Minnesota to work as teamsters during the Dakota War.
And so General Henry Hastings Sibley, our first governor, looks to St. Louis. Can you send us some teamsters? And well, what about contraband teamsters?
The black teamsters met a military recruiter from Iowa.
A man named Alexander Clark came up here to Fort Snelling to recruit. He knew that all these guys were coming back. So Clark recruited 30-some of these ex-teamsters to go with him down to Keokuk, Iowa, to join what became known as the 60th United States Colored Infantry. At that time, it was the 1st Regiment, Iowa Infantry of African Descent. Here you have this Iowa unit that's African American, and almost half the guys say that they are from Fort Snelling, Minnesota.
We are the sons of freedom.
Their job in Helena, Arkansas, was to protect a series of federal plantations. At one point, there was word received that a force of Confederate cavalry was coming in to raid the plantations. So an expedition of these African American troops, infantry and artillery, was sent out toward Big Creek, Arkansas. They were attacked on all 4 sides by Confederates. They were trapped. They fought for pretty much a whole day. And finally, a force of cavalry came to their rescue, and they managed to get away. They held their own. They proved their worth as soldiers in their very first battle.
Among the soldiers fighting with the 60th United States Colored Infantry was Henry Howard.
He was one of the young men who escaped from slavery, was brought up to St. Louis, was sent up to Fort Snelling, joins the Army, down to St. Louis, survives the disease down there, down to Helena, survives the disease, and is killed in action in Arkansas. Quite a story.
The defining moment to sacrifice your life is by enrolling.
We transformed ourselves to a higher purpose. What is it about the notion of sacrifice that compelled people to put their lives on the line? I find the Civil War is compelling because it gives us that window into the human nature of traumatic time.
Pay them homage, they responded for respect and dignity. The African-American soldiers of the 39th U.S. Colored Infantry presented this saber to their Colonel Azora Stearns of Olmsted County, Minnesota. He was one of many white Minnesotans who became officers in black regiments.
Sometimes African Americans would develop close ties with their officers so that when their officers had finished their tours of duty, the African Americans would follow them back to their homes.
Among the black veterans to migrate to Minnesota after the war was Dakota County's George Daniels. He served with William LeDuc from Hastings, Minnesota. This carriage house on the historic LeDuc estate is where George Daniels called home as he started his post-war life in Minnesota, and where he is still celebrated as a pioneer of Dakota County.